Now, the last year or so has been the stormiest for industrial relations in decades, especially in the public sector, with governments pitted against doctors, nurses, teachers and others over pay, with some pretty bitter rows and strikes for months. Now, the dispute with rail workers is still ongoing. It's made a household name of Mick Lynch, the boss of the RMT Rail Union, who's become...
Not a boss, a leader, a general secretary. You don't vote for bosses.
Well, for some would say a pantomime villain, others would say star media performer and thorn in the side of the government. I guess it depends what side of the fence you're on. He's also been one of our most interesting guests, so I know I always enjoy interviewing. Joins us now. Thank you very much for being on the programme today. Good to have you with us. So the government settles with quite a few public sector bodies now. No strikes, for example, in schools we're expecting. How's it going with you?
Well, no contact. They seem to pick out the RMT as a special category where they can't negotiate on a reasonable basis. We're available to talk to them, but I don't think I've met a government minister since January. And even the employers now have stopped negotiating. So I don't know whether they're waiting for all this other stuff to be cleared out of the way. We don't know if there's going to be settlement yet. I think they're out for referendum and consultation with their members. We'll see. They've certainly offered the others more than we've been offered. There's no strings attached to those deals. We've got to accept a whole host of change and dilutions to our terms and conditions and job losses. 2,300 redundancies were announced last week just in station staff. So it's a very tough road ahead of us, but we're determined to keep our campaign going. And the public now is out in support to save our station staffing and ticket offices, and we're getting a massive reaction to that.
Do you think that part of the reason why the government hasn't met you again is because they see this as the final offer that they've offered you? I think it's, am I right in saying, pay rises of 5% and 4%, more for the lower paid, no compulsory redundancies? That's it?
Well, they've withdrawn the no compulsory redundancies because they've put it into the companies. There's not national negotiations going on at the moment. I don't know if we'll get back to that. But they've got into each of the 14 train operating companies and there are no guarantees. They've issued 2,300 redundancy notices just in one group last week. So what they've said in the Commons is not true. The minister stood up last week and said there'd be no redundancies. That is a complete falsehood. I've got the letters in my office that inform me of nearly a quarter of station staff being made redundant. So
This is what I was saying, right, beforehand. The desire for them to close down ticket offices is not being done as a cost-cutting measure. It's not being done to streamline and make the railways more efficient or anything like that. It's being done to spite the union. It's being done to spite the RMT. Given the previous promise of no compulsory redundancies, the continuation of the dispute, and they're just like, oh, well, if we're going to continue having a dispute, we're just going to make loads of you redundant and just sack a bunch of you, right? Whilst fucking over the disabled, screwing over the elderly by forcing them to engage in technology rather than having somebody to speak to, and removing a key part of how, basic services might function by having an actual human to interact with. Should you have any issues in using the ticket machines or anything like that, for example, right? It's not being done for any kind of genuine utility. It's specifically being done because they want to spite the RMT membership. It's so incredibly cynical.
We're there to meet them. If they want to meet us, we'll meet up with them again and we'll look for an agreement. This has never been just about pay, as we've been saying consistently. It's about cutbacks, de-staffing and ensuring that the private sector operators maintain their profits as they have done.
Do you think, or do you accept that there needs to be some efficiency savings and reform when it comes to the railways? The government would say, look, taxpayers have spent £31 billion on the rail industry in the last 2 years. That's £1,000 per household. Many of those houses don't even use them.
Well, we always deal with change. There's not been a period in the history of the railway there's not been changed, and we will deal with any reasonable proposals. But what we want them to be is agreed, not imposed on top of us. And that's where the difficulty comes. They set down an agenda where our members must give up their contracts of employment, have them chopped to bits and go on basically the gig economy and versions of it. We can't accept that. We've negotiated these contracts over decades, and we want to maintain them. And that's what most people in Britain want now. Most people in all sorts of industries, including this one, funnily enough, are furious about the way they're treated, put on casualised basis, put on agency work, 0 hours contracts and all the rest of it. That's what we're fighting for, a better balance in the workplace. And we hope we can get that coming forward through our actions, but through political change in the future as well.
And that's the point, right? Is that they want to make the public sector the blueprint for the private sector. They can't have the public sector competing with the private sector for terms and conditions. They have to please their donors and their bosses in the corporate industries. They have to say, look, we are going to keep public sector pay low, keep their terms and conditions garbage, advantage and hack into their pensions specifically so that the private sector doesn't have to compete on that basis, right? Why would someone work in the private sector if the public sector is offering terms and conditions that are superior and the private sector has to follow along? So they cut down the pay, they cut down the terms, they cut down the conditions, they cut back on the pensions, and then that means that the private sector can in turn cut those back too because they're no longer competing with the public sector in that specific area.
Will change in the future. You're a bit optimistic about a Labour government, then you think it could be different?
Well, I'm optimistic that we'll get rid of this government. This government's got to go. It's
Keir
stumbling
Starmer
around.
hasn't said that much when it comes to you guys either, though, has he?
Well, he has. He has at the TUC Congress. His ministers have said that there'll be a new deal for workers.
Have they said what that is going to be, though?
Yes, they have. They've set that out in quite a lot of detail. There's at least 100 points of change in the new deal for workers, from contracts of employment, repealing some of the anti-trade union laws, giving a better deal for trade unions, but also giving a better deal for individual workers. Now, we want that to happen. We want these anti-trade union laws to be abolished. We want better funding for the public services. That's going to be tough. But if he...
They're not even repealing the anti-trade union laws of the 80s. There's only the recent trade union laws that are even more draconian than the other ones, which, quite frankly, doesn't really make that much difference. If the union wants to strike through all the little hoops they have to jump through from the latest round of trade union laws, they're going to be able to do it anyway. The real, killer anti-trade union laws are the ones from the 80s, the ones that saw the gigantic decline in union participation and union membership. Those are the real trade union laws they have to get rid of. The ones they say they're going to get rid of are really just kind of a fly in the ointment when it comes to the anti-trade union policies that we currently have on the statute books.
He delivers what he said he's going to deliver, then that will be an improvement for most working people in this country.
You started striking, I think, just over a year ago. At what point do you call it a day?
Well, when we've got an agreement.
So you could strike for another year then, if you don't get an agreement?
We don't want to be on strike on another occasion. We'd much rather get agreements in both London Transport and on the National Railway.
But you'll keep
we've got to have two parties
until...
to get to it. Yeah, we will keep going in our campaign until we get a document that our members want to support in a referendum.
No matter how long it takes?
Well, I didn't want it to take this long, but we haven't got the agreement. So our members have renewed the mandate recently and there's strike action planned. If somebody wants to come to us with an offer that can get rid of that strike action so that we can consider a new deal, then we'll take that on board.
Now, it's been quite a year for you. I mean, you're basically famous now. What's that like?
Well, it's a bit, look at statement stuff. It's a bit weird, somebody like me being getting a profile. I'm not interested in that.
Can you still go down your local pub without being recognised?
No, I can't go anywhere without being recognised.
Why, what sort of thing happens then?
People want selfies, people want to shake my hand. I don't get any abuse, really, going about the place. Maybe I do online. But most people say, even if they don't entirely agree with us, they respect the stand we've taken, that our members have taken, and they understand that somebody's put in a slightly different argument to the professional politicians, which I think is a bit of a shame. And it's a shame that Labour and others can't show that they're distinct from the kind of consensus that's got us into this trouble, where working people are struggling. The cost of living crisis seems to be ignored by the political class to a certain extent.
And you put everyone in that? Labour,
yes, I do. I don't think Labour's doing enough. We will be critical of Labour when they don't do the right stuff, and we'll be supportive on the occasions that they do. But at the minute, I think Keir Starmer and his team have got to show some clear water, some clear red water between themselves and the Daily Mail and the Telegraph, and themselves and the Conservatives. And at the minute, many people can't spot the difference, and that's a shame for somebody who's probably as talented as Keir Starmer is. He's got to show...
Oh, come on. Talented? What talent's he got, mate? Seriously losing faith in you if you can look at someone as bland and as an opinionless and as soporific as Keir Starmer and try and tell me that he has some kind of talent, really? Now, I'm glad that you're trying to say that Labour aren't putting water between themselves and the Daily Mail and the Telegraph, because he clearly hasn't put any, modicum of a gap between the rhetoric that you get from these papers or with the Conservative Party either. In fact, there are plenty of things he's to the right of these things on. And then you're here saying, well, actually, but I also have confidence that we'll get change in a Labour government and, this man's talented. Come off it, right? It's very clear that the Labour Party does not represent the interests of the trade union movement at all.
That he's on the side of working people and progressive politics, and I don't think we're seeing that at the moment.
Why don't you think you're seeing it? Do you think it's because he is focused on winning the election or because he just doesn't really believe it?
He's got 5, what are they, missions? Nobody knows what they are. Nobody understands them. Nobody could remember the 5 missions. He should be saying something about workers' rights. He should say stuff about funding the NHS, National Care Service, looking after people who are struggling in the housing market, council houses for the masses, controlling rents, addressing all sorts of stuff about what's going to happen in the imbalance in our society. He's not saying any of that. He won't dare mention the word socialism. I want to hear that word mentioned frequently, and I want to see a redistribution of wealth in our society. Because
I mean, at least to be fair to Mick, right, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on this one. If he's just being a pragmatist and saying, look, well, Angela Rayner's come forward with this new deal for working people, that should it come to fruition, I believe would be a positive step forward, right? There's some truth to that argument that he's making there. And then off the back of that, he says, well, the things that he's not doing is he's not talking about being a socialist. He's not talking about wealth redistribution. He's not talking about the fact that we've had more billionaires than we've ever had. He's not talking about fair deals, actually properly supporting working people as the party of the workers, right? He's not talking about any of this kind of stuff, not council housing, etc., etc. In fact, explicitly ruling out council housing like we got this morning and last week as well. So at least when Mick Lynch is making the points about why he thinks Starmer is bad, he is specifically following that up with policies that, us on the left all agree are necessary. So, at least he has the actual policy background to be able to put forward to the public what he should be hearing from the Labour Party that he's not hearing, which is more than we get elsewhere, where people just ignore this particular question of everything that Labour isn't doing that they should be doing.
There are a lot of very wealthy people, and there are too many very poor people. And now the people in the middle are being squeezed as well, with rents and mortgages skyrocketing. He doesn't seem to be on the side of the people of this country. I think he could be on the side of the people of this country, but he's got to show it to us before the election.
OK, there you go. That's a rallying call, if ever you heard one. Mick Lynch, thank you very much. Good to have you on the programme.
Thank you.
I think that's, a reasonable assessment. I just think that he really is, close to kind of wallet inspection territory for agreeing with some kind of like optimism for the Labour Party, because clearly I wouldn't have one. Like, how can you trust, right? Even if you believe that the New Deal for working people is something that's good, and I agree that if it, it's better than what we have now, getting rid of 0 contracts, terms and conditions from day one, repealing the recent trade union laws, these are all steps in the right direction. I'm not saying that they aren't. They're not enough. They're not what we should be hearing. But how can you even trust that these things will even come to fruition when Keir Starmer and the front bench are very clear in the fact that they're very happy to continually lie to try and get elected. They're happy to U-turn on policy to try and get elected. They have no actual moral principles to stick to the positions that they've previously held now, and will wholesale reject them when asked about them later on. How can you even look at the one policy that he said gives him some optimism, quote unquote? How can you even assume that will get into the statute books in the first place? How do you know that Keir Starmer is going to actually continue to run on this moving forward? Because again, we're getting quite close to wallet inspection territory, really and truly. I suspect Mick doesn't trust and doesn't believe in Starmer, but can't kill a potentially strong ally. That's probably fair enough. I think Tory voters aren't going to turn out for an election unless Keir gives them something to vote against. I mean, that's fair. I mean, maybe that's a reasonable thing, that maybe that's what their electoral strategy is that if we want to make sure that we look like somebody who won't make Tory voters turn out to vote against us, rather than someone who's going to make Tories vote for us or make non-voters vote for us, right? Their strategy might be, we think that people who want the Tories out at all costs will vote for us. People who don't care will continue to not care, and Conservative voters won't turn up to the election because we're not bad enough for them to warrant turning out to vote against us. Maybe that's the plan. That's not something that I'd considered before. But even so, right, sure, that strategy might get them 400 odd seats in the Houses of Parliament, Tony Blair style supermajority. But unless you use that to pass progressive legislation, it's a fucking waste, right? I'd rather have a 2-seat majority that passed huge amounts of progressive legislation than a 100-seat majority that passed nothing. So that's what we're going to get. We're going to have another Tony Blair situation where there's a raft of promises in the lead up to the election, and then none of them get acted upon. Proportional representation was in Tony Blair's 97 manifesto. Did it materialise? Of course it didn't, because it wasn't good for the Labour Party. Perhaps there isn't any kind of plan. They're just incompetent fail-sons chasing the best money-making opportunity. Well, that's my actual guess on what's happening. I mean, we all saw what Alistair Campbell was talking about in the Prospect magazine to businesses about how they can lobby politicians to be able to make money, and all of the friends of Keir Starmer from the Labour right who've left the party during the Corbyn years to go and join high-paying jobs in industry. Like, we know what those people's strategies are, so sounds more likely to me. But in either way, we're not getting progressive policy, and Mick Lynch is at least right to call that out, but I think that he is looking dangerously close to having his wallet inspected to look at policy that's being, the kind of small amount of good policy that's being proposed, and expecting that to ever actually become legislation in the first place. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It does help out the channel and the algorithm. And if you click the bell notification icon, it will let you know when I go live and when I upload videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my handle is @NoJusticeMTG, and that is Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to support my channel in a more financial manner, you can do so by becoming a member for just 99p, by super chatting, or by supporting me on Patreon, with the link is in the description of this video, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next segment.